Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start the meeting. Anybody who belongs up here belongs up here. Anybody who belongs in the audience, could you all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You need to put your mask on. All right, for anybody out there who chooses not to wear a mask, even though we are in a school building, I would ask that you sit at least 6 feet away from everybody else who has a mask on, and that includes all of us here. So please put the mask on or sit away from everybody else. Secondly, when you want to speak tonight, I'd appreciate it if you take the mask off when you come to the lectern so that we can understand what you have to say. Thank you. So having said all that, I am removing A from the agenda, and Dr. Mara, you are removing
D, Secretary of Position for Office of Student Support Services.
I am also removing B. So A, B, and D are removed from the agenda. So tonight, our two discussions are on the SRO officer in Warren and COVID-19 policies and procedures, which I promised all of the people who sent me the nice emails that we would finally get together and talk about that. So the Warren Resource Officer, Marianne, Ed, who wants to start with that?
Okay, so I can start and then. So I met about a week and a half ago with Dr. Marr, Dr. Santa, myself, people from Warren to discuss the town manager, the solicitor, the chief of police, and the finance director. We all met to talk about the SRO. The one thing that, the one thing that I shared with them is, even though I thought that the memorandum of understanding that had been signed 3 years ago was not valid because the person signing it really didn't have the authority of the school committee, I felt that since Warren had relied on that agreement, we had no choice but to pay whatever we owed for the past 2 years. So we had to pay our share of the 1920 and the 2021 school year. Now, our share for each of those 2 years would have been determined by the following. We had a grant for an SRO that was going to cover half of the cost of the SRO. And then we agreed with Warren, or the MOU agreed with Warren, that we would each pay 25%. So for 1920 and 2021, we have to pay the grant, we have to give them the grant, which is my understanding Mr. Ferrucci has already sent to them, and then we would owe 25% of the salary. The issue right now is we are disputing what the actual amount of that 25% is. And I know Mr. Ferrucci isn't here tonight, but in conversation with Mr. Ferrucci, we believe that we owe Warren $20,906 for one of those 2 years and another $19,000 for the second of those 2 years. Somehow Warren came up with a number of around $60,000 that we owe. Mr. Ferrucci says that number is not valid. I still have to sit down with him again. I have sent a letter to Mr. DeSisto, the solicitor to Warren, saying that we don't agree with the numbers. But once we do agree with the numbers, we are going to have to owe those past 2 years because Warren relied on that MOU. Going forward, we discussed the fact that for the 21-22 school year, we had to make a determination, and I told him it would be in front of the school committee tonight, as to whether we are going forward with the SRO. The issue for this year is there is no grant money. The RIDE has stopped the SRO grants, which means that if we agree to, according to the MOU, we would then have to pay half of the SRO salary. And again, without Mr. Frucci, I'm giving you an estimate. I believe that half of the cost of that SRO would be in the range of about 45 to 50,000. So what you're really deciding tonight is, if you're going forward with the SRO, you're going to have to come up with that $45 to $50,000. In our meeting, it was determined that the town of Warren only budgeted 25% of the salary. So they have the money to cover the SRO for the first quarter, but then after the first quarter, which is ending, I would think, in a couple of weeks, we then have to determine whether we're going to continue with the SRO for the remainder of the year, with the understanding that we're going to have to come up with probably almost $50,000 to cover that SRO, because that would be our half. And again, without Mr. Frucci, I'm giving you estimates of what he and I talked about, but it seems to me it's going to be somewhere in the $45,000 to $50,000 range to keep the SRO for this year. Is that, Dr. Mara, is that?
Very well done.
Thank you.
Harold,
Thank you.
Except that you also explained to us that we could rethink this next year.
Yeah, oh, yes.
With
Let me
the
add, all
town
right,
of
so
Warren.
the one thing that we made clear to the town of Warren going forward is that that MOU is ending this year. So going forward, we would want them to consider paying for the SRO the same way the town of Bristol. Right now, the town of Bristol pays for the full cost of the SRO that you have at the high school. Warren said that we needed to let them know by the January, February, if we want an SRO, and they would see what they could do about putting it in the budget. So no matter what happens, this is the last year we would agree to fund an SRO.
So the question before us tonight is whether or not we're going to go forward with the SRO for the rest of the year, or we're going to say no and move on without one. Correct?
Correct.
So I need a motion in either direction so we can have a discussion.
Motion,
Motion to what?
motion to keep the SRO.
I need a second.
Second.
All right, now we can have the discussion. Anybody?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So did we budget 25% for this school year?
I can answer that question. We budgeted nothing because we did not know about the MOU. So we have nothing in the budget for the SRO for this year.
And we still owe the town of Warren $20,000 from the last 2 years.
So we owe the town of Warren
40,000.
about 40,000 for the last.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
So the total amount, if we went forward and kept the SRO, would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000 that we would have to pay this year.
And no matter what, we have to pay the last 2 years.
Correct, I understand that, and as much as frustrating as it is, I didn't actually ever see that MOU until 3 months ago. I didn't even know it existed. It's no fault of Warren's, and it's no fault of ours, and they did rely on it. But this year, we have the opportunity to make a decision before we move on to next year. So that's really what the discussion is about. All of you asked for answers to questions, which you received in your packet, both from the principal of the middle school and Chief Borges wrote something in there. And you also got a copy of the duties of an SRO. And so I would say that if you have any questions about any of that, you should ask now, or if not, then we just move on to a vote. I will tell you that I am not in support of spending $50,000 on an SRO. I don't believe that we have $50,000 to spend, and I believe if we did, we could spend it in better places than that. But that's my own personal opinion, and it can be different from all of the rest of you, and that's the way a democracy works, right? But go ahead, Nikki.
In an amazing twist of events, you just said exactly what I'm thinking
If we don't have the money, no matter how valuable it is, and I hate this, because I appreciate that there is huge value there and our middle school needs all of that help. But if we don't have the money and we've had to cut programs and cut teachers, it is very hard for me to agree to vote for this.
Anybody else? Yes, Carly?
In another amazing twist of fate, I disagree with you, Nikki. I'm going to continue to talk with my mask on just because I feel more comfortable doing so. So I'll do my best to enunciate. I feel like we asked for and received some valuable information, including from the principal at KMS, who told us how valuable the SRO is. We've made a commitment to the school and the teachers and the students. They came to school and have been participating, believing and thinking that there will be an SRO for the remainder of the year. And I think he's a valuable addition to our school culture and climate. So I'm actually going to vote to keep him for this year, the funding wise and paying, even though it's going to be a difficult thing to do. It's going to take some time and effort, and it's going to hurt in other places, but I believe that he should stay.
I think I heard you. Go ahead, Erin.
So I'm curious to know if we vote in favor of this, if the majority votes in favor of this, how will we pay for it?
Out of our operating budget?
Fund balance. Out of fund balance?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have it. Right. Okay, I just wanted to clarify for everybody that that's what we're looking at. Okay, thank you.
Vic?
I'm all set.
Yes.
So I appreciate Mr. Morrell and Mr. Patoda and the Chief of Police sending how important these are to our school district and to our students. I do believe the SRO is a huge asset to have in our schools. I think it's needed at the middle school level. I know Bristol has been paying for it at the high school level, and we have one at the Bristol elementary schools. And I think that's a great bridge for community and to get the kids to have somebody that they could maybe talk to that they wouldn't normally talk to outside. The issue that I have, though, is obviously financial. I know Warren didn't have it in their budget, but neither do we. We don't have it at all. We didn't have it for the past 2 years, so we're using our underrun to pay for the 2 years that we didn't know about this MOU for 20 and 21. And for this year, it would have to come out of fund balance. Looking at what Bristol has offered us and the town of Bristol and our taxpayers, I do feel that at some point we need to talk about how we kind of approach Warren and see if they can continue having this service as a valuable community service and seeing if they could find it within their budget versus us finding it with ours. My concern really is our fund balance, and we're in a structural deficit, and we keep adding things and not taking away. And I feel like this is one thing that I feel that is a valuable asset to our teachers, to our students, to our communities to have this present. So as you can tell, I'm super torn, but I can't fiscally be irresponsible and pay for this when we don't have it. So I think that if we could maybe work with Warren and see if they can come up with the difference for this year and next year, if we can put it into their budget, I think that's the only way that this district can maneuver it, other than paying out of fund balance, which causes a structural deficit.
Which is my concern as well. I mean, the SRO brings a lot to the community.
I do appreciate, though, Mr. Morrell, your letters. It was helpful. Thanks.
They bring a lot to the community, and they have a sense of who the children are and what's going on. But I also know we have our head above water just barely, and I don't want to sink us anymore. And every little bit sinks us more. So I agree with Sheila. Go ahead. Did you want to say anything?
I agree with you and Sheila and Nikki. I think it's a great idea. I wish we could keep the SRO, but our budget just doesn't allow it, and so I can't vote for it.
Thanks.
I actually think a lot of the points in the job summary and duties can still be achieved without having an SRO physically in the building and formally as a part of the school, just as part of community policing. There's a lot of things in here that we can still achieve without having that person in the school all day, every day.
Yeah, hang on a sec. I agree with you. Before, we have principals and assistant principals and deans and teachers and all kinds of guidance counselors in the school. And before we had the SRO, we used them. And I think we've added some people along the way this year, and we could use them as well. So I think we're not leaving them bereft.
And I think too that there's still opportunity for partnering with the police department as, being members of the community together.
All right, thanks. Vic?
I'll take a different approach to this. Warren, this person is a Warren policeman, is that correct?
Yes.
And if we do not put the money out, is he still going to be a Warren policeman?
Yes.
And who's going to pay for his salary as a Warren policeman after he leaves us?
It's my understanding, and although they didn't share it with us, is they had enough money in the budget to fund the SRO for the first quarter, and then we needed to let them know going forward if they wanted it. I believe it's my understanding that he would revert to a police officer in Warren, but that's just my opinion from the meeting. Nobody said it out straight. I don't think he's going to lose his job. Dr. Mara, do you?
I was just going to mention, no, you're absolutely correct. But I was going to mention it seemed, and again, it's only perception, that they were somewhat amicable to the idea that for next year, they would explore the same model as Bristol has, where they would give us a SRO at the middle school. But again, there was nothing in writing. It was just a perception that they seemed to like, well, they were amicable to the idea.
I understand that, but the truth of the matter is, no matter what, this person is still going to be employed, and Warren's going to pay for it.
It's my understanding, yes.
I mean, he may not be in the school, he may be in a car somewhere or whatever, but he also could be available to us once in a while to come in and do whatever we have to do. By the way, I am very supportive of the SRO. Thank you.
Anybody else? Hearing none, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor, raise your hand, please. Of keeping the SRO, raise your hand, please. All opposed? The nays have it. Thank you very much. I would like very much, Dr. Marr, if you would continue to pursue the opportunities to talk with Warren about what we can do for next year, because I don't think anybody at this table thought that the SRO was a bad idea.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
And we still have to work out how much we owe for the past 2 years.
Yes, and would you also make sure that Mr. Ferrucci works with the town of Warren to make sure that we have the right numbers for what it is we have to pay them?
He's being diligent to try and figure out that puzzle.
And would you please let us all know when that's finally resolved so that we all have a copy of that?
I think Attorney Carroll and myself and Mr. Ferrucci would be glad to let you know that it was settled.
Thank you very much. All right, as many of you know, we've been getting lots of emails and there's been lots of discussion about COVID. And as I've explained to some of you that I've been able to respond to. We needed a couple of weeks of being in school to see what COVID was going to look like. And we saw some pluses and we saw some minuses. But the 6 weeks gave us a much better idea of where we were and what we needed to look at. So with that, Dr. Mara, I don't know who's handling this presentation.
Well, Dr. Santa is, but before we let her begin, I would like to recognize the fact that the nurses of the Bristol Warren School District are here and present tonight, who work tirelessly every single day. And our and they are trying to keep our numbers and our students in school. Also, we have in the room our esteemed principals of this district. Would you please stand? It's not an easy job today.
Well,
Thank you.
there is one thing that I want to say to the public. This is a workshop, and as such, it's interactive, which means that if you have a question about anything having to do with COVID, please come to the lectern and we will entertain your question and try our best to answer it. Okay?
Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Santa, who wears many hats in this district from time to time, and has done a wonderful job putting together this presentation. And as Chairman McBride said, as you have questions, we will both try and answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Mara, for the wonderful introduction, and for all of our nurses and principals for being here. I'd also like to point out another special guest that we have here this evening, Dr. Casey Eldert. He's our school physician, and he's been a wonderful support to our school nurses. So thank you for being here. So it really takes all of us working together to keep our students in school and safe and healthy. So in addition to the nurses and principals, we really need to thank the custodians, the teachers, support staff, clerks, our students, and our families for all working hard to work together and to keep themselves and each other safe. I'm just going to take a few minutes to review the prevention strategies that we have had in place. It's a layered approach to prevention, beginning with screening attestation. This year we went from having parents do a daily screening attestation form that they would have to submit to a one-time at the beginning of the year. And we encourage families who have not yet submitted that to please get that in. It just confirms that you will screen your child every morning for symptoms, and we appreciate your support with that. Also, mask requirements for buses in school are still in place, and I was speaking with principals earlier, and they say overall things are going very well. Our students are very respectful and very cooperative. We've also built mask breaks into the schedule at each school, and principals can answer additional questions about that at the end if you have any. In our classrooms, we've adjusted our spacing a little bit based on the Rhode Island Department of Health guidelines, moving from 6 feet to 3 feet, which is helpful in getting all of our students back in school. And we're also maintaining that distancing within classrooms, hallways, and lunchrooms. Another change for this year that I want to point out is that we are now allowing small group learning and intervention. Last year, we avoided doing that because of the idea of having students close or having them be in a separate room. But this year, we are doing that, and so far it has worked well. We're also, we're also continuing to use outdoor spaces to the extent possible. And I believe that's something that we'll continue with once we're past COVID. I know that both teachers and students are enjoying that. At the elementary level, we continue to assign students to pods where they are staying in their classroom for the majority of the day, staying together. That way we're keeping them separate from different groups. This is very helpful within contact tracing because we know that the students have primarily been self-contained with the same group of students all day. This year, we have also increased nursing support. We've added an additional nurse at UCole Elementary School. We've also hired nurse technicians for each school to be able to assist the nurses in dealing with COVID, dealing with contact tracing, and making sure that we're still there to support students in other ways throughout the day. We've also continued with school-based testing with family consent. This year, we received a grant. It's called the ELC grant, and it allows us to expand our testing to include PCR tests. Our nurses will be trained at the end of the month, and we'll begin that process. Having the on-site testing allows us to have a quicker diagnosis and get the results back sooner than if a family went individually to a testing center. The daily screening for symptoms is one of the easiest way that we can prevent the spread of COVID-19. This year, the Rhode Island Department of Health identified major symptoms, including a new cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, and new loss of taste and smell. Anyone with these symptoms, students or staff, will be sent home to isolate and get a PCR lab test. If families have the signed consent form, we're able to do that testing right in school. And I want to just point out a note, and this was kind of a miscommunication. Our nurses are still sending students home with other symptoms, such as a fever, so non-COVID related symptoms, such as a fever or other types of illnesses that students would be sent home in the past. They're still being sent home for those things. It's just for COVID, a fever is not considered a major symptom. And when I go to the next slide, you'll see that it's listed as a minor symptom. So minor symptoms are those symptoms where a student or a faculty member just has one of the symptoms. They will not need to be sent home, but they will be asked to continue to monitor for additional symptoms. Next, we'll just review determining close contacts. We had a lot of questions about this process and why so many students were being sent home and how those decisions were made. Each time that we receive a notification that a student or staff member has tested positive, our nurses, nurse technicians, and principals send home the positive case and complete the contact tracing process. In the past few weeks, we've reviewed our approach to contact tracing, and with guidance from the Rhode Island Department of Education, we have adjusted our approach slightly to use the HALO approach whenever possible to determine close contacts. This minimizes the number of students or staff that need to be sent home. Our nurses will continue to monitor the data and consult with the Department of Health as necessary, and if we need to adjust this process again, we will. Just a quick slide on when to quarantine and when not to quarantine for close contacts. And this is information from the Rhode Island Department of Education. And I want to note that our goal is to keep everyone safely in school to the extent possible. You'll notice on the when not to quarantine a close contact, it says that close contacts who are vaccinated are not required to quarantine. So we strongly encourage anyone who is eligible for a vaccine to please get the vaccine, and this will limit quarantine within the school. Next, I'd like to talk about the recommendations that were recently released for travel regarding quarantine and getting tested. So these are guidelines from the Rhode Island Department of Health, but we are considering them requirements. In that it's very difficult to manage and very confusing if people think of it as just a recommendation, not something that they need to do. We will be making this a requirement and hoping that families and staff members will really look at this carefully and consider the options when they travel and considering the responsibilities when they get back from travel. That's our approach right now. We understand that it's not, although it may not be a legal requirement, we're hoping that families and staff members will cooperate with that. And then you can see the recommendations that are for international travels as well. International travel requires PCR testing, whether you are vaccinated or non-vaccinated. And again, I'm distinguishing between a recommendation and a requirement. Our nurses have been diligent in collecting data since the start of the school year on the number of positive cases, students sent home, students who are kept home by families with probable symptoms. And since the start of the year, based on the information that I looked at last night, we had 42 students that had tested positive. Similar to the state data, we had a spike mid to end of September, and we're seeing a slight increase after the long weekend, but the numbers vary. We continue to look at them, to watch them, and to use them to inform decisions. So when we are looking at the data, we continue to reinforce safety protocols, including consistent and correct mask wearing for students and staff, maintaining physical distancing, adjusting quarantine protocols to keep as many students safely in school as possible, encouraging families to complete the one-time attestation form, and to the consent for in-school testing that would allow us to use a Binex test or a PCR test. And lastly, again, to the extent possible, we are encouraging students and staff to get vaccinated. Ideally, if we are at an 80% vaccination rate within a school, that would allow us to lessen some of the restrictions that we have in place. And then last slide, just to kind of sum up some key takeaways. Daily screening, staying at home when you're symptomatic, getting tested, contact tracing, quarantining, close contacts through a halo approach, and vaccination are all critical to keeping Bristol Warren schools open. K-5 pods, masking, physical distancing, proper ventilation, hand washing, and sanitization are essential to stopping the spread of COVID-19. It takes the entire community, as I said earlier, families, students, and school staff working together to keep schools open and enable students to access in-person learning, socialization, extracurricular activities, and sports. And we do appreciate the continued support and collaboration of all stakeholders in navigating this pandemic together. Thank you very much. We're happy to take any questions that you might have. We do have some from school committee members that Dr. Mara will be reviewing.
I have one question. Please, looking at this chart. How many children that we quarantined tested positive after we quarantined them? According to this chart, it's 0.
So I will let our nurses review. That is not the whole chart that you're seeing that. It's an image of the chart. I believe there are a few cases on there, but our nurses can speak to that more.
I can speak for Mount Hope. Mount Hope has had one that was a connection to another positive case.
Thank you.
Okay, the elementary nurses are a little more, have had more, and it would be best if they spoke to their numbers for their school.
I'm just curious.
I don't know the total, but they, like, Rockwell,
Thank you.
So needless to say, at Rockwell, we've had 15 cases thus far as of yesterday.
I can't hear you. I'm
Sorry, can I take this down? Sorry. So we've had 15 cases as of yesterday, but the good news is a lot of them recently have been home anyway because they're quarantining with family. Out of the positive, the classrooms, the 4 classrooms that were quarantined, approximately 120 somewhat students, 3 classroom positives, 3 classes had the positives, and from those 3 classroom positives resulted in 2 more in 2 of the classrooms. So 3 cases in one, 3 cases in another, and only the one in the other.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, that in Rockwell, for the children who are quarantined, who didn't originally appear sick, only 2 of them tested positive after quarantine?
After we quarantined, there were 2 in each room. So 2 classes one had a positive, the other had a positive. Then
So
there were
4
2
children.
more in each room, so 4.
4 children.
And then 1 other in another room. So a total of 5 that have been affected. And that's out of 127. So it's really a low number.
All right, thank you.
And they were within the halo at my school. And do you know what a halo means? Okay, thank you.
Hi, at Hugh Cole, we had not had any classroom spread up until the last couple weeks. We did have 2 teachers and 3 children from 1 case. And this week now we've had a classroom with a positive child at home, and just found out that today one of those children, another child in their class, did test positive. I don't have my numbers for the whole year, but we are seeing some spread. My numbers last week, I had 0 cases. The week before was big. This week so far we're up to 5.
Thank you.
March,
Huh?
I have a question.
Yeah, well, they're all answering mine first, and then you can ask them. Go ahead.
Erin Welch from Gutierrez. To make a long story short, we've had 0 so far.
Thank you.
I'm Julie from Colt Andrews. We've had 0 so far.
Thank you. 0.
My school nurse couldn't be here tonight, so I'll answer the question
That's
because
all
I
right,
work
Mr.
with
Morel,
her.
thank you.
We've had 4 cases, no classroom spread. Most of the cases, additional cases, have been through outside athletics. Pop Warner football, Swansea football, and soccer, but no classroom spread.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Sheila, you had a question then?
Yeah, so Rockwell specifically, we're getting a lot of calls from parents that we're quarantining whole classes. Is that,
The last 2, I just did a halo.
what, can you explain what that is?
Yes. So positive student.
Could you come to the microphone so it gets recorded, please? And anybody in the audience who has a question, just raise your hand and I'll recognize you.
If you're welcome to come up if you want to help me. If you want to come up too. Okay. So a halo basically is you have the positive student and you draw a halo around it. So if you have a desk here, you look at the desks all around it, okay, in that halo, like an oval. So it really, if a kid's in the corner, in the back corner, it's only going to affect the one in the front and the one to the side. If they're more in the middle, it could affect 4 students. So both sides, in the back and in the front. Does that make sense?
It does, but then how do we quarantine a whole class?
Well, we just, as Dr. Diana just said, we just decided last week to try the halo approach. We've been doing full classrooms up until then.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but that doesn't mean, for example, at one of the schools, they did do a full quarantine this week because we have to look at the circumstances of each case and what applies. How long are they unmasked? Are they unmasked over 5 minutes? Or 15 minutes. So it really depends on the circumstances of each case, correct? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it a 3-foot or a 6-foot? Like, when you say the halo, how?
3 foot. Yeah, the desks are 3 feet apart.
Okay, thank you.
Last year, there
Yes, please, go ahead. Identify yourself for our secretary, please.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Almeida. I have twins at Rockwell. So my first question, Nurse Kim actually just answered because on a personal standpoint, it never made sense to me, but the whole class, but I wasn't aware of the halo. Maybe I didn't read a communication, but that makes sense. So thank you for explaining that. On a separate note, it was in one of the slides. I know the state has, or the Department of Health has recommendations for domestic and international travel. And you are making that a requirement in this district. Was that correct? Is that?
to make it a requirement. We hope that families will abide by the recommendations.
Okay, understood. So my question is, and I'm really not trying to be difficult, we have family that we do visit frequently in Connecticut. Is that, what is considered travel? Like a weekend in Connecticut, would that be considered domestic travel, or is it like Florida? I know it sounds silly, but I don't know.
No, it is a great question, and I mean, you have families that are going to Massachusetts, New Hampshire. Would any of our nurses like to respond to that?
So yes, it's a hot buzz topic, because last year we had, what we had was the Johns Hopkins website where we could look at states that had a greater than 5% positivity rate. And that's the kind of states that we're looking at, we would request, strongly suggest, however you want to put the verbiage, to get tested. It's not as concrete. We've had discussions about, because we're in New England and we have such close, especially us Rhode Islanders, you know, we go shopping in Massachusetts. So one of the guidelines is, what type of event are you going to when you go to Connecticut? Are you going to a large wedding, a funeral, and an indoor? And there is a slide available that what kind of travel locally in these states is more high risk than if you're going to, I don't know where your mother-in-law lives, but you're going to your mother-in-law's in Connecticut and you're staying there and you're not really going to any big events. That would be considered low risk. And so you wouldn't necessarily. So there is another slide available. It was presented to us at one of the pod meetings that we go to once a week, so we could dig it out for you and send it to you.
That would be great if we could get that out to families, because it is it's difficult to discern, but I like the way that you explained high risk versus low risk.
So let me just restate to be clear. It's a recommendation that you quarantine if you go on a trip. According to that, it's a recommendation, it's not a law.
So it's not a law, but if you, the Rhode Island Department of Health is not, what's their verbiage? They're not a governing, they can't make laws, so whatever we call that type of body. So what has been said from the beginning last year, not even this year, but our first foray into this, is that school districts, the LEA needs to set their policies. And then we need to communicate them to our families and our staff and say, these are our policies, these are going to be the expectations. The Department of Health gives you, for example, the easiest one to explain it is the quarantine thing. That's the easiest one. There's 3 levels of quarantine. There's the 14-day gold standard, there's the 10 days, and then there's the 5-7 quarantine. So we as a district set our policy on which we're going to use. I don't know if that helps explain a little better, but we need to have some clear policies to get out to families, and we base our policies based on their recommendations because they can't say you have to do it. The governor can issue an executive order, but I do believe CDC is not a governing body either, so they can't make laws. So when they give us recommendations, it's based on science and research, and we can make, not we, you guys can make the policies of which way we're going to go.
Okay, I see you guys. I have one more question, then I'll shut up. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I actually received some emails about this, not nearly as many as I expected, honestly. It's no theater program still, I'm going to be honest, COVID. But I tried to actually ask people to call me because I think you learn a lot more about what people are really feeling when you talk to them on the phone. And 100% of the people I spoke to led with, we understand that everybody in those schools is doing the best that they possibly can to keep our kids safe. We understand that these guidelines are ever changing. and the environment in which our kids are learning is ever changing. The environment in which parents are trying to go to work and do their jobs is ever changing. So everybody who I spoke to led with a great appreciation of that. But of course, not having any answers beyond following the guidelines, from RIDE and from RIDO, didn't have any real solutions to the frustrations. But there were sort of 3 high-level questions that I thought were worth asking because they were sort of consistent. One of them was that there was a concern expressed that all guidelines didn't feel as if they were being followed consistently across all grades and all schools. Now, I believe you've explained that now because these guidelines are changing weekly, and what maybe each school is doing is changing every week. Is there any other reason that these guidelines might not be followed consistently?
Are you talking at the elementary level, or are you talking like the 4 elementary schools
the
are
parents
not
I spoke
following
to
them?
about this issue were elementary.
We've worked hard to try to keep ourselves consistent. Our elementary nurses have worked really hard to try to keep it consistent. Once a week, we have nurses meetings, and it always comes across that we need to be doing, I'm speaking for them, we need to be doing the same thing across the board, and we've tried. But as it was said, each case has its own set of circumstances. So yes, the discussion now has been, instead of an entire class in an elementary school being quarantined, we practice the halo approach. But there can come an episode where, that didn't quite work, and there was a lot of interaction. And we can't say that these kids all definitely stayed apart. So we are trying hard, but then if you can't throw into the mix the secondary schools, because I do things a little bit differently up here because I have a population that can be vaccinated. Right. So I use the halo, but then I weed out the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated, that type of thing. So if that's what you're looking for, that's kind of, we are trying to be consistent.
I think that,
So they created a K through 12 exemption so that if children are exposed in a classroom setting and they've worn their masks consistently all day and they maintained 3 feet of distance, they wouldn't have to be quarantined if they were considered a close contact. But I know at Gutierrez, we had to quarantine a classroom yesterday because they eat lunch in there and they have snack in there. So they're with their masks. So the K through 12 exemption goes right out the window if they're taking their masks off to eat. The class that was quarantined yesterday actually were halfway through their quarantine before we even knew that, we had a situation by the time we were informed. So it required those children to distance learn only 3 days, and they'll be back on Monday, as long as they have a negative PCR today or later. Their last day of quarantine is Friday. They get to go and attend community events on the weekend and come back to school on Monday. The class that we quarantined on Friday, again, by the time we were aware of the situation, and because of the long weekend, the last date of exposure had been the Tuesday before. They only had to distance learn 1 day. And they were all back to school on Wednesday. Actually, they weren't all back to school on Wednesday because some families didn't get the PCR in a timely manner, so to speak, or for whatever reason. And so they needed to stay, some children needed to stay out a couple additional days.
thank you. Just 2 more questions. My next one is, a few parents expressed the wish, concern, frustration that the close contact protocols appear to be the same for indoor close contact versus outdoor. I believe there was a KMS cross-country team and they were all, or the cross-country runners were all quarantined, but they're different grades, so their only close contact was outdoors. So there was some question about should that be different if it's outdoor versus indoor?
When it comes to our sports teams, that's a call that goes to, I do believe that Alexia and Dennis do the same thing. We call the Department of Health. And we say it's this particular sports team. They rate the sports teams, what sports teams are considered more at risk for transmission because of the type of sport it is. So you would have to know the discussion with the Department of Health about the particular sports team.
That makes sense. So again, it's back to what we are being told by RIDO there.
Right, so I consistently across the board, I mean, I have the most sports teams. Do I get a prize for that?
Yes.
So I talked to the Department of Health, not this year, knock on wood, but last year frequently, and if it involved a sports team, I was on the phone with the Department of Health before I started doing anything else.
I just want to comment again about quarantine with the winter months coming up. Yeah. So that being said, everything we've shared tonight, it's very important for people to realize at the beginning of the year when Ms. McAuliffe and I had to do full classrooms, a lot of it was we had many days of rain and indoor recess. So you're not just en masse, with the lunch and snack. You have to count that as well. But then at recess, they're all playing very closely together and they're moving around in their pod. So that may require more quarantining than a halo. So I think moving forward, we just need to remember that it might be harder in the wintertime, but we're going to do our best to stick to the halo as much as we can. Okay.
So one approach that we have tried to do is if we have a pod in a classroom, we ask the specialists to do the same pod. We ask like the library, the health, the music, they sit those same children together throughout the day. So when we quarantine, if we have to, we can look back on their seating charts and we see that it's consistent throughout. And that's why one day we had to do a whole class, but the next time we actually had 4 that were affected because we were able to do that approach and every specialist did that for us and it worked out. So we also look at that angle too.
Thank you. The last thing was a universal thing that was expressed by all of the parents I spoke to. And again, I hate to present a problem without a solution, but there was universal feeling that we need to do better, especially for our elementary kids that are quarantined. These little kids who are home for potentially, 5 school days. The parents just feel like there is more that we should be doing to help those kids, and I agree. I feel like this district has proved that we are agile and that we are creative, and I feel we do have to invest some time in working out how we can better support those elementary, particularly aged kids who are quarantined. So I just want to get that out there. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nikki, for asking some great questions. I had some similar ones. So my line of questioning will be a little bit shorter. I just wanted to get some clarity around when and how the HALO approach was decided. Did that come from the Department of Health as well?
So, yes, as a matter of
Okay.
fact. Last year, which is all a blur, but I can tell you that our first big event here at Mount Hope High School was quite a big event. I'm sure you guys all remember it. But that was the first time that we had multiple exposures. So that was the Department of Health. So when we all started this, it was the Department of Health that was doing the contact tracing. All I was doing was submitting classroom seating charts, rosters for sports teams, things like that. They were making all the phone calls and all that. So that's where we learned of the HALO approach. So when I asked the nurse that had that, one of the nurses that was on that case, she said that's what they do. They look at the seating chart, they look who is around it, based on the teachers, you see squares, and who was in, last year it was 6 feet, who was in that 6-foot perimeter, and everybody inside would be quarantined, and that's where the HALO came from.
Thank you. Let me
And
see.
they're all angels.
Yeah. Oh, aren't they though? especially at high school and middle school. I have 2 of those in my very own home. Thank you for that information. I just wanted to reiterate to kind of what Mrs. Piper said about the concerns I think are coming from families that are, I think there's just so much uncertainty still. And I think living and operating in a world where there is so much uncertainty, sometimes you just need somebody to blame. And I don't think it's fair that it often lands on nurses, but I'm thinking that that might be where a lot of this anxiety is sort of coming from. It's directed, and I'm sorry. Can we build you some shields that we can hand out? Again, it's a thankless job with so many layers, and I'm sure when you all decided to become school nurses, this was never part of the thinking. So thank you very much.
Anybody else? Yes. Be my guest.
So one of the questions I have is the PCR testing.
Yes.
How fast does it return back?
Well, so just so we can be perfectly clear on this, we are not doing it yet. Not because we don't want to, but because we had set up a date. We had a date with the Barrington school nurses for that, the week before the students came in, where we had quite a bit of time for different events. We all piled into our cars. It's so far away, Barrington. And all 6 nurses and all the nurse techs, we went to Barrington Middle School, and we were there with all of them, and Dominion Lab did not show up.
Oh.
So we've had to rebook. So on October 27th, Dominion Lab will be coming to Mount Hope High School to train the 6 nurses. I did go to one the next week, but we just can't coordinate our times after school to put in an extra 90 minutes. So we're going to use it on our PD day. Dominion Lab's going to come here and train the 7 nurses and the 5 techs.
Okay, so once you get trained.
Once
and
we get
everything,
trained.
How long will it take once
They
you?
have told us like 24 hours, 48 at the most. But what was explained to me, I did go the following week to Barrington, and what was explained by Dominion was that, and also the Commissioner of Education sent out a bulletin about this. What will happen is when the lab specimens get to the lab, say, the end of the day, all the test sites are sending it to Dominion, the K through 12 specimens will be moved to the front of the line, and they will be run prior to yours, okay?
Okay, so I guess my concern is that it says begin weekly PCR testing for athletes not vaccinated. So
Yeah, well, that's a discussion that we need to have.
yeah,
Whether
because
we can-
if it's
whether we
taking
can do that.
48 hours, then how are they gonna play? I mean, I
In for a minute, I was on the phone with Barrington this morning and several other districts, and they were talking about their process with PCR tests, and I asked the question of how long does it take to get the results back, and they said that they are receiving them within 12 to 24 hours.
So about your student athletes, that's a different system. So what the plan is for student athletes, and it's not just the non-vaccinated, because of the rise in number of the Delta virus, the Department of Health recommended that we test, when we do testing of athletes, you do everybody, okay? But that's called pool testing. So what we do is, what happens is there'll be groups of 6. So you come in, you take one swab, and our kids do it themselves because they're old enough. They swab an array 5 times around, they do the other side the same thing, and we put that in a test tube and we label it with their name. Then they take a swab, they swab an array, they swab the other array, they put it in the pool test tube. So it goes in, all right? And so we have a batch. The lab will run the pool test tube. They'll run the pool water. And if the pool comes back positive, then they'll pull the 6 individual tests and run those to find out which one is the positive one.
Okay.
Does that
so
make sense?
It does. So the
Okay.
12 hours, is it still 12 hours?
We wouldn't keep them from playing. This is just called pool testing. So once we would do if we do the testing, if we do the PCR testing, they continue to play. This is surveillance testing to see if we have a positive.
So it would
case.
be so it's not vaccinated. It would be 6 kids,
Six are in a pool.
6 in pool testing. So
In pool
that
testing.
not vaccinated is not true?
It'll-
We should take that off.
Well, except for that if we see a downward trend with Delta, it might move to just the non-vaccinated. It changes all the time.
I know, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're going to PCR testing, or the document doesn't, because it says, okay, so if it's PCR testing and it takes 24 or 48 hours, and then Diane Santa said it's 12, and then you're saying, no, it's moved to, I'm just trying to figure out, like, are these kids not
There's
going
two
to be
different,
able to
well,
play, or?
there's two different scenarios, okay? So our goal within the nursing department is that if you come in presenting symptoms, we're going to do a rapid on you, okay? With parent permission, with consent. We're going to do a rapid on you.
Only if they have symptoms. These are the athletes.
No, I'm talking
just
about.
talking about athletes. I'm just talking.
All right, we're not going to, all right, so we've got 2 scenarios that you're thinking on, all right? For our student athletes, if we do decide to do surveillance testing, it is PCR testing and it's pool testing.
Okay,
And they
so-
don't have to wait.
Who decides the surveillance testing? I'm just trying to make sure we communicate to parents and we understand as a body, because I don't understand.
Well, first of all, we need to be trained, and then we have to see how long like
But
last year, we didn't know how long it was going to take us to Binex 140 some
Right,
kids.
so who determines the surveillance testing?
I think that's a discussion with Dr. DiBiase, with Christy Belisle, myself, the trainer, to see if we're going to go forward with surveillance testing.
It's not determined by like high number of cases or?
Well, there's supposed to be, if there's a prevalence, yes, you would want to do surveillance testing throughout the schools and your athletes. But we haven't even tried it yet. We haven't even started it yet. We don't know how long it's going to take to do one kid at the elementary level, at the middle school level. You know,
Yeah, I was just,
I think what she's asking is, how are we going to do this for athletes? Yes or no?
I don't know yet. I can't answer that yet.
okay, so I think when we find out, I think we need to communicate that out to us. and
Yes,
to-
but I can't sit here and say, yes, we're going to do it.
Okay, it just said it on a thing, that's why I'm asking.
Okay.
The other question I have is, so when it's a full class, distance learning is offered? Is that correct?
Yes, when it's a full class that's out, the teacher is doing distance learning with the entire class.
Okay, so when it's a halo at the elementary, I guess, well, at the elementary level, how are those kids being, I mean, going through distance learning with elementary kids?
So
Done it.
teachers are posting the daily assignments because the majority of our programs are digital programs. The students are able to complete their lessons within Google Classroom or Seesaw.
So do we have someone following up to offer support to those families?
In some cases, we do. I've heard in some cases, teacher assistants might be doing a check-in with students. But we don't have a designated person, so to speak, because that would require hiring an additional staff member just to monitor that.
I'm just concerned because it seems, I mean, I know that we had voted, I think it was like 2 or 3 months ago, that we requested to look into the distance learning options for either parents that just weren't comfortable sending their children to school, or for this case. I'm really concerned with if these kids are being quarantined for up to 14 days, they're losing 2 weeks of academics.
I mean, they are if they live with a positive at home, but typically it's only a max of 8 days.
So 8 days,
Right.
they are
Yeah.
losing out on education for 8 days, right? So it could be 5 days. So it could be a week, 5 days. right?
Right.
So how do we make sure that those students, and it's not the nurses, no, it's not. How do we make sure that these students aren't falling behind? Because if you think about it, we've lost 3 academic years. We're in our 3rd loss of academic years. And I just am concerned, like our test scores were not great. We have kids that are slipping around. We have families that are trying to pull it all together. And what are we doing as a district for those 5 days for elementary and then middle and high school? And I know those are a little bit different. Mr. Morelli probably and Dr. D probably can attest to the middle and the high school, how they work. But I just am concerned that we're not adding these components and kids are going to struggle and suffer again academically.
So elementary principals are welcome to give some examples of how this is working in their schools. What we are thinking of this as is if a student were out for any other medical reason, teachers would provide assignments, provide support, check in with students. In addition, our schools have implemented what we refer to as an acceleration block at the elementary level. So if a student is falling behind, there's time built into the day for them to get extra support. At the middle school, they've implemented a win block, which is what I need. And that's the same type of time during the day so that we can catch students up if they have missed out on anything.
Okay. Thanks.
I have a couple of questions. I'm just curious about, so the buses, are they still?
So today at the pod meeting, they had said that the bus quarantine is being reviewed. And as of right now, it has not officially changed. And they're still quarantining two. So it can affect a lot of children. So they are looking at that. So as of right now in the playbook, it has not changed.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it makes sense.
So Denise actually dealt with the bus and spoke to the epidemiologist at the Department of Health, so I'll let her take over.
She's following.
I don't really have much more information. Yesterday, though, I did, when speaking to the epidemiologist, we did do a bit of a halo on the bus, as we would have had about 25 children if we did the two. And we also had 3 siblings, so that unfortunately not all seated together, so that made it even more. So after speaking with them, we did do a bit of a halo there on the bus. Apparently they are looking at those, the bus, and they may not be requiring any, collecting any information on bus students anymore. But again, I know we keep saying this, but when I tell you things change every day, every pod meeting that we get on, every day we get emails that things change. So it's just a very, fast-moving kind of process. And so as of this moment, nothing has changed on the bus, but I do expect very shortly that things will change, meaning less children should be affected on the buses.
I know on the buses in Mass, what they're doing is if the windows are open and, they're still apart though, right? Every
No,
seat
not
is,
on our buses.
every seat is filled?
I will tell you, oftentimes when they pull up, you'll see empty seats in the back, and yet they still have the kids together on the seats. The bus company is not really user-friendly.
Do we still have bus monitors or no?
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Do we still have bus monitors?
Yeah, but they can't move amongst the bus. They just sit up front.
But they can't direct them?
Right, so what's happening is attendance is really tough to get, and I know Diane's been working so hard on trying to get that. We've quarantined kids before that were on the bus but not on the bus that day. But they're not really taking attendance. In fairness to them, they're also shorthanded too, so I respect that. But I will tell you that they are not spread out. And our goal is to keep siblings together, and they're not.
But is somebody on the bus in charge of that?
I can't hear you.
Is somebody on the bus in charge of,
Hand sanitizer.
No.
I mean, principals, do you find that, I guess, how, with the busing? I'm sorry?
so, but if the kids, if there's more room on the bus, you're saying you're seeing space in the back of the bus,
Absolutely.
then the kids should be separated as much as possible. So who's responsible for making sure of that?
And that is why the quarantining is the two. However, there was one superintendent that his fight was, I went out to that bus, I took a measuring stick, and it was well more than 6 feet. Why are we quarantining the said students? And that's where this next conversation has led to, and that's why Denise was talking to the epidemiologist, and they see some changes happening.
Okay, thank you. I still have a couple more questions.
Madam Chair, if I might add to that, I know Diane has spoken to, I have spoken to the bus company, Ray is his name, and, asked if they could just please let the bus drivers know. We know that is not an easy job. We know that. And for them to have to take attendance and make sure that, Jerry is sitting in his right seat, it is difficult, but we ask them, make an effort. That's all we're asking. And they do say, he said that, kids change buses frequently. So what might be the seating chart for this week may not be for next week. There might be 1 or 2 missing. So that is understandable as well. But we just ask them to make an effort to see if we can, pull this in, because the buses can be a petri dish. There's no question about it. So we appreciate their effort when we see it.
Karen, did you have anything?
Yeah, so just, are they eating lunch in the classrooms?
It's different in every school. At Rockwell, we pull up the last one. It's our last one. We eat outside whenever possible. But it's getting to the time of year where we're out.
Okay.
The other
And
big thing is the bees.
the
We need
bees,
to ask for that to be addressed.
the bees? Okay.
They need to spread.
Okay.
No.
Did you request that? Okay.
So I'm just wondering if, I know it sounds like that is the reason for whole classrooms to be quarantined, but is there any way to figure out who is maybe more than 6 feet apart? Would that meet the requirements that those students wouldn't have to quarantine?
So we co-banders eat in the cafeteria, so I can't speak to that, but for the ones that eat in the classroom spacing, we answer that.
We've had this issue at Youth quite often, and very consistently from last year up until probably this week, the guidance for, because we always follow every case, even if it looks identical to what we had the day before, we always want to speak to the Department of Health. And initially it was, if they were in the same room, eating together, for one of you, and if they're not someone 15 minutes, that was an automatic, oh, we have to be out. That guidance is another one that we're seeing start to be more debatable. So, and that is something that we were able to do a halo this week. So sometimes it's a halo event, it's not because the other group activities and things going on, but that is just now kind of coming up, maybe not be a little.
Right. It would be great if we really didn't have to quarantine the entire classroom.
Not that we want, we obviously don't want to quarantine the entire classes, but of course safety first. And,
again, for all of those reasons. And I just think it's not like this would be half the class at home, half the class at school. So, but, you know, we do want to obviously work towards the halo, so that we don't have to do this halo, families can go to work. And so we present at school.
It's just, it's such a disruption in their routine.
Like our class we had to do today, we could have looked at a halo, but we have two positive kids in the same class. So at that point, the halo just doesn't seem to make sense.
One of the things parents are working on is the TAs in all the elementary buildings are really working hard with the kids because they have to, the lunch, if they're indoors, they have to be facing forward. They can't be turning around and talking. If they can talk, but they should be yelling. You know, the louder the voice is obviously more of a problem. That's difficult for the TAs to keep track of every day, but we must have that. And if they do that, a halo would make more sense. If they're moving around, they've got the mask up, they're going to the trash can, they're turning around, fooling around with kids, well, that's different. So we're really working on education with the TAs during lunch and going in the room as much as possible to see what the kids are doing. I like to just kind of spot check a little bit. They see us and like, if that helps at all.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of the halo. Obviously, I know you're trying to have that as your first option, and depending on the situation. I just know that working in a school with the disruption in their routine over the last couple of years, I mean, yes, they're absolutely missing out on education, but the behaviors and the SEL stuff seems to have gone up through the roof too. Let me see if I have any other questions. Okay. And are we doing, if students in grades K to 12 who are not fully vaccinated will be sent home and require a lab-based PCR test immediately? So it's immediately and on day 5?
The Department of Health actually said today that the recommendation is the day, if I'm saying this correctly, the day they find out that they were exposed, and then that day 5. Sometimes it's all the same day or it's within a day of each other. That has happened to us this week. We had positive last week and just found out. So their day 5 actually was 2 days ago. So again, that didn't make sense. But the recommendation is once you know you're exposed and then day 5.
It's, and Mrs. Carol can look this up, there's an executive order now about exposure and testing. And I don't remember the number of the order, but there's an executive order in regards to exposure, getting tested right away, and testing day 5.
We ask them to give us the day 5 or greater, so they don't have to give us the first one. That would be a little,
How are you guys doing I don't think nurses are keeping track of who's coming in school.
Every single one. We have grids. For example, last year, my spreadsheet of my small school had 450 entries.
Right.
So, yeah.
we as the nurses do all of the tracing, every single one.
The
So
tracing.
Every single child that's quarantined in her class, my class, anyone's class, we then have to track. And that's why it's a blessing. Thank you all for having us, giving us nurse techs. They help us. We have to make sure they don't walk through that door. Along with the support of our secretaries and principals, it is a lot. I mean, we're really collect data, that's our new.
So are you providing them with a not cleared list, so to speak?
Right, so together as a team, we're all so confused here. I mean, it's hard tracking, but parents have really been supportive as well.
We have to look for siblings, if we have a case, if we have to call the middle school, high school, Getting a little better. But we know, like at your schools, like I've been around for a while, and I've been told you know the siblings, and you know pretty much what grade they're in. Aaron and I do not have a full-time trip, I just wanted to bring that up. Just because when testing is starting, there may be days that we're quarantining, we're busy, and we don't have a tech with us, that we won't be able to do this on a certain day. So it would, you know, but the hope was we would each get a full-time tech, but if that doesn't happen, it may be a little different from what we are.
And you're still sending kids home for temperatures, though, because you would do that anyway, right?
Yes.
Right, just that if they only have one of the minor symptoms, they did not be required to get a PCR before returning. But if they have two, they need to get a PCR. Yeah, they're vomiting or diarrhea.
They're still going home.
They're still, you know, representing.
And my last question is about when not to quarantine, and it says if they're vaccinated. I'm just wondering if they're symptomatic and vaccinated, then they need to.
Symptomatic, they need to get tested in quarantine to get those results back. Because we all know that even though we're vaccinated, we can still track cold. So
Right.
if you're symptomatic, we can rule out COVID first, then we'll go after the strep throat, the mono, and all the other ones.
And I don't know if you are familiar, but not all siblings have to go home if they're asymptomatic on the same thing. So, you know, some families have, you know, 3 children just at Katera, so they might have one at Katera, one at the middle school, one at the high school. But if they're not vaccinated, but only one of the children is sick, the other 2 children can stay at school.
Unless the child comes back positive.
Unless they come back positive.
Okay.
So while you're waiting for the symptomatic student to get their PCR results,
The siblings can be in school.
That's a big,
That's good. Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a question. Hang on 1 second. Let me understand it, if I understand this. Make sure I understand this. So I have 3 children. One has symptoms. The other 2 can stay in school while I have that child tested. But I have a child with no symptoms, but he's in the halo, and he has to go home anyway, and he has to get tested and wait 5 days. So who is the closer contact? The sibling or the child sitting next to me in the classroom?
So is the sibling positive, Marge?
No,
Okay, but is the child that's sitting next to you positive?
maybe.
Yes, we know they are.
No, we know they are.
But they
See,
weren't-
it doesn't, well, yeah, I understand what you're trying to say, but sometimes I think that the cure is worse than the disease. And the cure of keeping them out of school, children die from the disease. I know children die from the disease. I know it's a bad disease. I know that it hurts a lot of people. But at the same time, we have to take a look at the whole child. And if one of my children is symptomatic and you're letting me send the other 2 to school who sleep in the same bedroom that he does, who eat at the same table, who do all the same things in the house, but yet the child who's sitting 3 feet away and for 4 or 5 hours max a day has to go home, it doesn't track for me. It just doesn't.
Yeah, so let me sort of back up a bit, because I think that there's definitely a lot of confusion and it changes day to day. But the difference that in this situation is we know that there's a child who's positive and again is spreading that. So the kids in that area that they're next to are at significant risk. The child that's home, you don't know they're positive. And so the siblings of that child, and I think you're right in the sense that we want to keep kids in school. And so every day, right, we're talking to the Department of Health to try to say the balance of keeping kids in school, because we know there's problems with mental health and all these learning issues that we've missed. How do we do this while keeping kids in as best we can and yet keeping kids safe? And so in this situation, you weigh that good and the bad and you say, this child who's home and their siblings, the child that's home, we don't know that they have COVID. And so it's worth it to send the siblings to school to preserve that mental health, to preserve that education. Whereas the child who's in school who's positive, we know that those kids around that child are more at risk because we know that there's a positive case. So that's the difference, is we know that the confirmed positive versus the suspected positive in siblings.
I understand what you're saying, but when you send a child home because they're sick, you don't know if they're positive or not yet. But with the halo effect, you send all the others home too.
For a confirmed
So it
positive.
takes, otherwise, if somebody's sick and you think they might be positive, what you're telling me is the children don't go home unless they test positive?
No, not if that one in the middle is positive.
If somebody comes to the nurse's office and has a stomach ache and a fever, has two symptoms, comes to the nurse's office, the nurse determines that the child should be tested. At what point do you send the halo home? Only when it comes back positive. So, no, I'm just trying to understand. I didn't realize that you meant positive. I thought if you suspected that there was a child, that you would send that halo home until you had a positive test, and that didn't make any sense to me.
Exactly right.
But I still think the cure is worse than the disease here.
Marge, I think Principal McAuliffe has a question. She's been raising her hand for a bit, or a statement.
Perspective for this year, we've had 16 cases in 3 weeks this year. Last year, we had 37 cases all year. So this is a much more elevated situation at the beginning of the school year than it was all last year. So just kind of a little bit of perspective.
I understand that, Mrs. McAuliffe, but I also look at the chart and I see that and I asked the question earlier about how many children are actually being infected while in school, and it's very small.
We don't know where they're infected in most cases. I mean, it's really impossible to know. You can suspect that it's a family member, a football team, or whatever, but you really don't know.
No, I know, and you can be asymptomatic too, but I'm just saying that I don't see this huge correlation between children who are sick in the classroom and how many they've infected throughout the classroom. That's all I'm saying, according to
There actually is some data on that, and you're right, in the sense that most of the child transmissions, this is across the country, are actually out of school, and it's because of mitigation that we're doing here. The challenge you come in is, as a system, we have to say, how do you keep kids safe, and you have to put protocols in place. And so I think that's an attribution to say that what we're doing is working across the nation. But you're exactly right that there are much more kids that are getting infected outside of the school setting. But it's because of the mask wearing and the social distancing.
Well, I know they're piloting it in Westerly, I think, and they're already doing it in Mass. And that's
The type of the test to stay program,
test and stay. And I hope that we're getting there very quickly.
Yeah, I think I don't know if people understand, there is a program that's called Test to Stay, which you can try to keep kids in school and just be testing them periodically as opposed to quarantine. And that's a pilot program, but, and so there's options to do that at some point. But again, every day, the challenge these guys run into is the recommendations that we get a week later are completely different. And we're just always trying to navigate this across all settings. And, you know, it's a
No, I understand that. And I understand it's not easy for anybody. And I understand that making the decisions aren't easy either. And I understand that all of these people clearly know what the ramifications of their decisions are. And I don't believe that they're making their decisions in a vacuum. I think they're making their decisions based on their best knowledge and their best knowledge of best practice. I'm just saying that too many children are out of school, and I'm trying to find a way here to keep them in school, to keep parents at work, to keep them learning, to get them caught up. And I want to make sure that we are doing it equitably across the district so that all of the elementaries are the same. The middle school and the high school each have their own challenges based on their ages. But I want to make sure that we've tightened up enough as much as we possibly can so that children can be in school, because I think maybe they're not getting COVID, but they're definitely getting anxious.
Well,
So
yeah,
you're
I
trading
think
one
we
for
agree
another.
too. One thing I would say on that though is again, anything we can do as a district to promote the COVID vaccine for the high school kids and the flu vaccine is going to make a huge difference this year for exactly that reason. So I think whatever we can do to promote those two things, you're going to see benefit in exactly what you're talking about. So I think you're right on that. The more we keep kids in school, the flu vaccine is essential this year. And again, also how many of the high school kids we can get, it's going to make a huge difference in terms of your protocols of quarantine.
Thank you. Tara?
Yes.
Brian, I see you, but Tara got me first. I'll call you when she's done.
So I had a lot of questions, and I'm not going to ask them all today because we would be here all night. So Ellen, I might call you later. Tomorrow. No, not tonight. I might call you at a later time. But the ones that concern me the most are the academic, but before I get to those, the data collection, which I love hearing that the numbers are being collected and the data is being collected. My question is, and I'm not sure if it's on here, but how many students have actually been tested or have we sent home? Because I know especially in the month of September, we sent a lot of children home because it was only one symptom and they had to get tested. So do we have a record of how many children were actually tested? No. So because it's my understanding that if they are sent home, they have to get a test to come back to school. Is that correct?
If they have systems, as we discussed.
Right. But so how many of those students how many kids got tested?
Every student we sent home with 2 problems have to get tested before they come out.
So that was my question. On here, is that number here? So that's the close. Which number is that? Probable sent home?
Yes.
So this.
And then also include that probable cases at home, so probable sent home.
So probable sent home, and then the probable stay homes are the ones who tested positive?
No, those that citizens and their parents agreed that they would keep their child home and would send them to school and get them tested.
That's not a perfect number because not everybody shares
Okay.
with us where they kept their kid home.
All right, so the probable sent home is, my child had a symptom or 2 symptoms, was sent home, needed to test. The probable sent homes is that column. So in week, KMS and UCOL had no probable symptoms, they had nobody sent home
No.
those 2 days?
The data just
Didn't, okay. And then out of those probable sent homes, the COVID positives are the first column. Okay.
But it might not just be a reflection of what was sent home, that could have been a call that we got or something happened, the week before. That was our,
Okay.
yeah, because remember, again, like Aaron said, when we've had great parent response, my child doesn't feel well, I'm sending them for a test. So that's
Right.
then.
Okay.
I come in every morning, the first thing I do is go through my email, and I will have, 5, 6, 7 parents who just have sent me screenshots of that PCR, and I didn't even know that they went.
But we add it to our spreadsheet so that when we get
Right.
these numbers on Friday.
So, all right, so the number of students that you have sent home are dictated in that third column, and the number of positive, whether they were from the testing or from parental reporting, is in that first column. Okay. So my second question is Binex testing. So I know that we have gotten away from Binex testing, but I know part of the status test in Massachusetts at least is if you're asymptomatic and you are tested, you can stay in school if you test negative with the Binex test.
So in Rhode Island, the Department of Health totally flipped from last year. So we were using Binex last year, and sorry, this
Yes.
affected your kids. We were using Binex for our asymptomatic surveillance on not only our students, but our staff. This year, no,
Binex, we use Binex on symptomatic only. And that's Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Department of Health has told us that we're using rapid testing on symptomatic only so that we can get a jump start on, if we do the rapid testing with the symptoms and it comes back positive, that is a positive case. That's considered a positive case, and then we begin the contact tracing immediately. But if you have symptoms and your rapid testing is back negative, we're still gonna have to do a PCR to see, and you could get a negative antigen to your rapid and a positive PCR.
So we are doing the Binex at this, we will be.
We'll be using, we'll be using Binex till it comes out.
Because Binex are all done as of December, correct? Or one of them is done in December?
It's Binex, we're gonna be, right now they gave us Binex test kits, and they're gonna expire the end of this month and the end of November. But then it's thank you, it's fewer. Yeah.
Okay.
Fewer.
So, all right. The next question that I had was with academics. So many of the parents, and this is more the middle school and the high school level, the children are sent home, and because of the, especially using the halo effect, you're not necessarily sending whole classes home in middle school, so you're not getting the direct instruction. And if a child's out for 5 days, how are we, especially like a math, say the child's in advanced math. I had a lot of parents concerned that they're not getting the direct instruction. And so now those children, especially middle school, who don't always tell their parents what they're supposed to be doing, are falling behind. And some of them are now actually not doing well in school because they had quarantined. And it's kind of a roller coaster ride for the parents. Are we using any of the ESSER funds? We use them for the nurse techs, but are we using any of those to support academic supports? Like increasing, for a child that is going to be out 5 days, an after school program, but you don't really want to penalize them because they didn't do something wrong, or during their, I'm not even sure how the middle school is set up. I don't know if they have the extra classes anymore, but that's my question.
So I'll just quickly respond, and then if Mr. Morrell would like to elaborate. So with the ESSER 2 funds, we hired 2 additional math interventionists, or actually 2, because previously we did not have any. We hired 2 math interventionists at the middle school with our ESSER funds, and an additional reading specialist to be able to support students who had learning loss from the prior year, and also for during this year if they needed support. And those positions are working in conjunction with that wing block that I mentioned earlier, but also supporting students in other ways throughout the day. And I know the middle school is working on a plan for an after-school program, and we're already planning ahead for summer program, so that is coming down the pike as well. Mr. Morrell, do you want to add any more?
Well, your deadline for submission is Monday, so you'll have it on your desk.
Okay.
So the intervention block is available to all kids. I haven't had many calls from parents with concerns or guidance from the guidance counselors with any of these concerns. But we do have that intervention block every day. And we have an advisory period built in, so students can use that time to play catch up. And like Dr. Santa explained before, would be if a student was home with the flu, or if he was home with a sinus infection, 3-4 days, the assignments are given to them. As many days as they're out, that's the amount of time they have to submit their work.
Right.
Google Classroom is phenomenal. They can do it immediately. And the teachers can have conversations with the students through Google Classroom. The teachers give them feedback. So there is a little bit of instruction going on. It's not like a teacher standing in front of you, but there is that interaction that's happening.
So, and I'm thinking mostly of math because you're learning new material on a constant. And so if you miss a piece, then the building block is not there for the next piece. And I would love to see something that we have at the high school, at the middle school. I've wanted to see that for years, where you have that, it's an ASB class where if you're failing a class, especially the athletes, they have to attend the after-school program. And so if that's something that we can bring to the middle school through the ESSER funding, I am definitely in favor of that. It's something we've been looking for years there.
Then we come up with the struggle of, we come up with all these great ideas and all these plans, like we ran our great summer program, and then you can't find the people to fund them.
That's right.
Nobody works, so we put together all these great plans, and we can stand on our head and spit nickels, but you can't get the people to come and work.
You can't get the kids to come, or you can't get
you can't get people to take these jobs.
Oh, the jobs.
Yeah, so my teachers are working really hard in that intervention block. And like I said, we have the math interventionists even doing push-in with the math classes. So we have them go into the general math classes. So they're working with kids that are falling behind while, the math teacher, the content teacher is delivering the instruction. And then you have these supplementary folks in the classroom. And it might not be a special educator, it's another math teacher, thanks to the ESSER funds. And the same thing we're doing with literacy. There's a lot of push-in going on.
So do we need more support?
I think we're at a good place right now. Like I said, I haven't had a lot of communication concerns from parents. Progress, we just hit the progress mark, halfway mark of the first quarter. Parent conferences are coming up, but I really haven't had anything come across my desk and nothing from guidance. So I think we're in a good place. And like I said, having that second teacher in the room, especially in math, is really beneficial.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So another question that I have is for our faculty. So I know that one of the classrooms, and I'm going to use KMS again because it was at KMS, the teacher stayed out of school and took a sick day. And that teacher had to get a PCR test to come back to school. And then it took a couple of days to get the PCR test. Then it took a couple of days to get the results. So that teacher ended up being out for 5 days. Is that common?
It's uncommon because I don't think that's ever happened.
Well, I know it happened to KMS, and the teacher wasn't feeling well and was recommended to take a PCR test.
Well, we haven't had anybody out for that length of time because I'm the one who does the coverages every morning and checks Aspen and sends my report to Dr. Sander and to Dr. Maurer every morning. We did have an instance where a teacher went, she wasn't feeling well, and she took it upon herself to have the PCR test done. And but it wasn't 5 days.
So it's not common then?
Not at all.
Okay.
My attendance, and I was just bragging to my colleagues over there, my faculty attendance is outstanding.
So actually, you lead me to my next question, and that was our faculty, our staffing, not just faculty, but staffing. Has there been any issues with staffing and needing additional subs? And, are teachers staying out longer?
You can talk to them, I'm fine.
Yeah, no, but no, so, is this affecting our staffing, or what effect does it have on our staffing?
Well, you know how it affects our staffing is when Erin sends kids home from Gutierrez, and I have parents who are teachers of kids at Gutierrez, and so those teachers have to stay home. But that just happened today.
Well, no, and I know that it has happened before. It's not just happening today. So my question would be, and I don't know if this is information obviously we can't get tonight, but how is it affecting our staff and our faculty? Do we have to pull people from other areas and put them in are we pulling our specialists and putting them in classrooms? Are we taking our TAs and putting them in areas that need coverage? How is all of this affecting our staff?
It is having a huge strain on our staff. Between the elementary schools, we're in constant communication. There is a substitute shortage. When we are able to get the teaching and learning fellows, that is our godsend. Even with the teaching and learning fellows we have, almost every single day this school year, after the first week of school, we have had to pull our specialists. We have had to use special educators. We have had to cancel preps to use our itinerant teachers. Our administrators are covering classes and are filling in, like for our teacher assistants who work with special needs kids who need a one-on-one PCA and things like that. So it is a huge strain on our staff because we're constantly having to remove prep periods or have people go work above and beyond or not provide their services and fill in for another job. And by no means is it our teachers or staff members being lazy or calling in just to take a day just because our staff have been hit hard with illness and family serious issues this year that we're just trying to fill the holes for. And it is definitely a strain on everyone, and we're definitely afraid of burnout. So teaching and learning fellows is really the answer because the day-to-day subs are just not there.
So, and I understand what you're saying. I know
Yeah.
it was an issue prior to COVID.
Sure.
Never mind with adding COVID to the component.
Yeah.
So can we get the data on our staff?
We have a spreadsheet for
Absolutely.
elementary schools
Yes.
that we're collecting.
Yes,
Yes,
Dr. Mara, can we get the data on staffing numbers and what the absentees and not just faculty, but also the support staff?
Absolutely,
For the,
absolutely. Mrs. Beaupre put together the staffing, not the absentees, but the staffing. But the absentee rate is fairly high. It really is, and we are in desperate need of substitutes. And so we are, as the central office administration, are working on a couple of scenarios that we will be presenting in trying to entice and increase our substitute pool, because unfortunately, our pay is probably near the bottom in the state.
But this discussion is about COVID.
And I know I was getting a phone call every
Right.
day.
This was before COVID, too.
No, I mean, this discussion tonight's on COVID.
Right.
If those teachers are out because they have COVID, then I'd like for you to let the school districts know how that's impacting our teachers.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Carpenter did a wonderful job of explaining, because it puts pressure on the other teachers in the building because they have to cover other people's classes while they're still working a full day, and so they're all trying to be very creative in what they're doing as far as, filling in the blanks. It isn't perfect, believe me.
No, I understand that, but this discussion really is
Yeah.
about COVID-related
Yeah.
absences and not about
I
what
think-
we had beforehand. And yes, it's putting a stress, but tonight we're focusing strictly on how COVID is affecting our students and our staff.
Right.
So if we have a lot of cases of teachers with COVID, then we need to, I think it would be appropriate to let everybody know what the absentee rate is and how much of it can be correlated to COVID.
Because that also affects our learning disruption.
Well,
when
but I'm
teachers-
just looking at COVID right now. So that's what I would like you to give everybody is the absence rate and how much of that has to do with COVID. Because let's face it, everybody in this room, and not necessarily teachers, are having to stay home from work because their children are sick.
And that is an issue.
So
too.
I want to know what that issue is amongst our teachers. I want to know if they've caught it here, and I want to know if, what's going on with that with respect to COVID. The other part you can talk to us about when you're ready, when you have all your plans together. But tonight I just want to keep it focused on COVID. And yeah.
I think Mr. Morrell alluded to that when he said, a lot of teachers in his school have children in our elementary schools. And so when they are sent home, especially the younger ones, they have to stay home with them unless they have somebody else that will.
And my point to that is COVID related.
Yes, it is.
But so do all the people sitting here at this table who have a job, whose child might be sent home. They have to leave their job as well.
That's correct.
So I'm not looking at that so much as I am looking at how the spread of COVID is impacting them in their classrooms with their ability to do their job, not what's happening to everybody in the community, which is what a lot of my letters are saying. I can't take any more time out of work. Jobs are not as people are not as tolerant anymore about you having to stay home. They're having a rough go of it. That's a whole nother story. We're just talking about the COVID
And
here.
So just one final thought to that, just the direct correlation between the staffing issues that we're having for COVID and other reasons, does the direct relation to what we're talking about tonight is that prevents us from being able to do those follow-up services for our students who are at home. We can barely cover the students who are in building, so we just don't have the staffing available to provide that extra support like we need.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, thank you. I said Brian first. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I can wait.
Brian?
Thank you. I just had two things. One, it was mentioned earlier in the presentation that there were some things that were not able to be done, particularly at the high school level, because of low vaccination rates. I know the homecoming dance is not happening because of a low vaccination rate. So I just wanted to ask, what do we know about the reported student vaccination rate at the middle school and the high school? Is that something we have a number on?
Alan's going to shoot him.
I can't speak to the middle school's vaccination rate because I can't speak to it. But here at Mount Hope High School, as of last week, we had 38.44% of our students vaccinated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can't speak to the middle school because I don't have access to KidsNet.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Do you mind, Brian, just
No,
has
go
to
ahead.
do with this? Because one of the questions that I was going to ask is, can everyone hear me with this mask on?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I know that I had sent screenshots of my kids' COVID cards who are vaccinated. Would that be helpful to you if parents, were notified? I don't know if you notified us or if I just did that, but would it be helpful to send a notification out that if
we have
parents are willing?
asked that we have asked that parents send us. I started in July with my particular group because I was working in the summer. So I asked, and I did receive quite a bit as they've come through. Parents have forgotten. Parents have, they get busy and they forget. They're dribbling in. I thought here at the high school, we teach responsibility. I sent an email to the students just saying, if you've been vaccinated, I just want to add it to your health record. That caused a big stir. So, I think that because it's not mandated, we cannot go into KidsNet and run a report. And there's a long story about that, but any vaccine that's mandated, the school nurses can go into KidsNet, run a report of their students on a particular vaccine and get the information. When it comes to the COVID vaccine, we can't do that. So we are asking for the community's help. Some parents are sending it in, some parents aren't. The parents that aren't, I don't think it's malicious. I just think it's everybody's busy.
Well, that's why I wanted to bring it up to
Yes,
just
everybody's busy.
suggest that sometimes, I know for myself as a parent of 3 kids, reminders are super helpful. So maybe it's something we want to consider sending out from the district office,
I do
that
believe-
if parents, because we can certainly ask, that if parents and guardians are willing to send a screenshot, then you at least have some of that data at the school, and maybe you'll see that percentage would go up.
I hope so. We did. So when I ran the first report for the high school, I ran it on September 10th, and we were 33.33%. So then a couple weeks later, when I sent the email to the kids, it jumped up to 38%, 38.44%.
And what are you basing that percentage on? Like,
So-
have you asked
So what you
students?
take is, you have to do it in reverse. So what you do is, you run a report on a class. And the way that Aspen is set up, it's called immunization noncompliance. and we had asked the tech department to put COVID on our vaccine list, so we would be able to track how many people have the vaccine, because you want the data on how many people how many students are vaccinated. So we run sort of a reverse report. So you run the report and you see how many kids don't have it, okay? So then you count them all up, because there's not a total on the page. And so if there's 215 kids in I think it's sophomores, I can't remember, and 89 of them, so many have it, and then you subtract and you say, okay, only 89 in the sophomore class are vaccinated. So I went by 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, and I did my math and added it all up and came up with, we had 926 children at Mount Hope High School, 356 are vaccinated.
But you're getting that data from the state?
No, I'm getting that data from from Aspen, from the children's school health record. So when you sent your kids' information in, it went into the nurses inputted it into their immunization record in their Rhode Island school health record.
But my point is just not everyone has sent that in, right?
Correct.
Okay.
They have not.
Okay.
They have
Just-
not.
just
And I do
making sure I
believe that
understand.
in one of the community bulletins that went out a couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about COVID, we asked parents to send in their vaccinations. We reminded them about the attestation, and we reminded them about testing consents. So
I think it's really important that we focus on reminding people, and also with these teaching and learning fellows that are so needed. I don't know, are we advertising this right on our homepage, on our website? How else are we getting the word out? Because if these are things that are necessary, there should maybe be a push towards getting this information out and in.
Brian, did you have anything else you wanted to
Yeah,
say?
I just wanted to make one other quick comment, which is that it was mentioned in passing that test scores were slipping. And I just wanted to point out that at the June 14th meeting of this body, it was reported that the median student in Bristol Warren schools exceeded growth goals in the 2020-21 school year on reading by 38% and on math by 12%. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. It's a perfectly valid concern about students not being in the classroom, about staffing issues and so forth, but I just want to be very clear that our schools have actually held the line in terms of student learning and in terms of what we're supposed to be doing, even through difficult times. And I just want to make sure that everybody is clear on that. And we put that message forward, because there's been a lot of negative press about the district, and I want people to know what's positive about the district. So I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Marge, could I just make, it's on the vaccine thing still, and it's addressing Mrs. Thibodeau's concerns about learning loss with quarantine at the middle and the high school. And I think it's important that we note that the majority, 7th grade and up, pretty much, the only kids who are being quarantined are the very few who cannot get vaccinated and those who are choosing not to be vaccinated. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
So I think when you guys are trying to talk about promoting this for students, I think you're saying that there are probably a lot of parents who have gotten their kids vaccinated but haven't presented to the school, which is probably legitimate. I think on some level, if you can relay to them that the quarantine procedures are different if you present your vaccination card to the nurses, that's one way that maybe can incentivize people to bring those over.
Correct. Thank you. I think that's important to note, that those kids who are being quarantined are only doing so because they're unvaccinated.
I emailed all the Pennsylvania spring parents last year in the spring and asked if their child had been vaccinated to share them the same screenshots that we need or copies of cards, all of them were sent out.
Thank you. To Mrs. Piper's point, I'll be brief. I'm looking forward to seeing how having the vaccination age lowered to encompass our elementary schools will hopefully keep our community safer and hopefully make our nurses and teachers and administrators' lives a little bit easier. We all deserve that. So I'm looking forward to that positively impacting our community.
Thanks, Carly. All right. This is the wrong mask for these glasses. I'm going to wrap it up now. I would suggest that any more questions that you have, please feel free to contact your principal, contact the administrative offices, or contact us. We're all available. It's a work in progress. And I think we want to get to a point where this is just not something that we have to discuss or spend a whole meeting on. And so I appreciate all of you who took the time to come out tonight, and we're ready to answer our questions because you weren't necessarily prepared for them, and for that I apologize. I never like to do a thing where somebody doesn't have the answer right at their fingertips. But I do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come here, and we will do this again when the administration tells us that there are major changes again. We will have another meeting and we will explain those changes to the parents. And thank you, everybody. Yes, Ellen?
I know one of Tara's questions was about statistics, and if you go to the Rhode Island Department of Health website, there is a K through 12 data site. But what we were told at the pod meeting, and does everybody understand what the pod meeting is? Because we keep throwing that word out there like everybody knows what it is. What we were told at the pod meeting today is they are building a K through 12 database dashboard. That's what I'm looking for, K through 12 dashboard, that we will be able to more readily and easily access the information about vaccine rate per school. They're going to break it down to per school. It'll have the information about cases and things like that. So hopefully, and when we get that, I mean, we're all happy to share anything we learn too. So that's hopefully.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. And hopefully we'll get to test and stay real quick. Yes.
This question is for Mr. Cabral. He had made an inquiry of us regarding the numbers that were outside, who are actually outside at Hugh Cole School. We just ask is there anything else you would like?
I already talked to Diane about that.
Okay.
I did not want to know the grades. I want to know what schools, what neighborhood schools they were supposed to be in. That's what I was.
Okay, so we can do that.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna need a motion now to go into executive session. We're going into executive session. When we come out, we will not take any action except to adjourn the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight, and hopefully we won't have to see you like this. We can just see you in the regular neighborhood. Thanks.
So moved.
Yeah, I need a second.
Second.
One in the other room?
Yeah.